Hello fellow gardeners, here we are in another house we have. We're running a little trial. We have 2 rows in the ground. This row and that row is growing in the soil. These other 3 rows are growing in containers. We have the self-wicking containers we're talking about all the time. We have the cloth laying over them to keep the weeds down. And so we're just showing people how to grow these. Even in this in the ground, we put a ground cover over the soil before we plant our tomatoes in. Now I will tell you, we use a no-till here. We never till this soil. We think and we believe that tilling that soil is just like a tornado coming through here and tearing all my houses down. I have to rebuild them. But when you till that soil, you're killing worms, you're killing those good bugs and bacteria that's in there. You're tearing up their houses, they have to go back and rebuild. So we never till our soil. We come in before we plant and we will lay some fertilizer down, some of the Sustain, some of the Sea Mineral, and then we will, and Epsom salt, and then we'll put compost on top of that. Then we put the ground cover, a 3-foot wide roll of ground cover down over that, and we put our plants in that. Every 2 feet we'll put a plant down through. We have to cut a little X, or either take a hair dryer, burn a little hole, put our plant in there, and then we let that grow where there's no weeds can get to it. And then we put our drip tape under there also. I forgot about that. But the drip tape is under there so we can turn on a valve at the end and water it all at one time. It drips water every 8 inches in this soil. Once a week, we're going to add fertilize in that water to put on these plants. Because as they get big like this, now then they're up here, they've got 3 and 4 and 5 hands of tomatoes on them. We've backed off of the nitrogen. We're using more superphosphate and more potash to mature these fruits that's setting. We already have fruit down in under this. Now this is the downside of what they call stake and weave, growing in the ground. You put up stakes every 6 to 8 feet. It's about every 4 plants. And you tie baling twine. You weave it back and forth through each plant around this stake and back around the other way. And it makes a figure 8 around each one of those plants. That's called stake and weave. And you do that about every 6 to 8 inches as that plant grows. That's a lot of work. The downside of this growing this way is your tomatoes are hid down under this heavy foliage, and you've got to get down there and find those tomatoes. See those blooms? Now they'll be making fruit here, and you got to find those tomatoes. Because you can see those red tomatoes though kind of in there if you move the vines back and forth. But there's no perfect way to grow tomatoes. There's lots of fun ways to grow tomatoes. And so we do it with the in the ground, stake and weave. We do it in a container. The container choice type that stays short. And then we did the ones in the containers upon the barrels, let them hang down like a hanging basket. We did the ones in the containers where we tie them up a string, single stalk, and desucker all of those. So there's lots of ways you can do it. You just have to pick out the one that works best for you.
I have a question. You see advertised, excuse me, on television about these topsy-turvy tomatoes. Are those specialized tomatoes?
No, that's just a regular tomato that will hang over. These cherry tomatoes that we had over there will do the same thing. The downside of that for me is the container is too small. And that's the reason I went to this 20-gallon container and set it up on a barrel. Kind of works on the same thing as a topsy-turvy. And we just put them, let them hang down, and they make tomatoes. But they got a big enough container to have their root system, and have the self-wicking water in the bottom that they don't go hungry or thirsty. And that's the downside of that little topsy-turvy. It's only a 10-inch pot. It's going to only hold just probably a pint of water. And that tomato plant, when it gets huge and hanging down there, I have some of these tomatoes that'll use 7 gallons of water every other day. So we have to put more water in. There's no way I can keep that plant watered unless I go out there about 6 or 8 times a day and water that plant when it gets huge. Because as soon as you put that pint of water in there, it'll hold, it's going to suck that up in just 15 minutes ready for another drink. And so that's the downside of using a small container.
On tomatoes that look what we call skimpy, you know, they don't have a lot of foliage, don't have a lot of blooms. What causes that? Is it lack of water?
Lack of water, but most is lack of fertilizer. Some people are faithful about giving a drink of water to the plants, but they don't think about putting that food in there. But they do think about it when they got their little dog or something. You know, they put them water and they put them food down there. But I don't know why they think about their tomato. They don't think about giving it food every time it gives its water. And that's what we need to do, because that plant likes to eat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, just like we do. And the more food you can give to it, there is a limit if we're giving too much food and burning the foliage, but that's you can put a lot more food than what most people put on. These tomatoes here, this is a container bush tomato, which they're not going to get huge. They're going to get about 3 feet tall, and you can see they're making blooms all in there already. And but this is the type some people like. You don't have to tie up, you don't have to stake up. Put it in a container and it'll grow and grow you some plants on the patio. Those tomatoes you can see over on the next aisle, those are those cluster tomatoes like you see when you go to the store and you see 5 or 6. They usually just allow 5 to 6 on a cluster to grow, and then they'll all ripen at the same time. They cut the cluster off, and that's what you're buying in the store. And that's what we're growing in that row over there, and we're putting strings on those so that we can get to them and pick them. And you can see we already have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hands of tomatoes on those over there. So, and we'll bring you back later and show you as these tomatoes start ripening. I think those tomatoes will be ripe in 2 weeks on that bottom hand on that tomato there. In 2 weeks, I think we'll have ripe tomatoes.